What's up guys, my name is Ace, and Marathon is a game that I initially wasn't really planning on getting into and playing, and I never took part in any of the alphas in the past. However, over the past couple weeks, the hype's been building up a little bit, and it did pique my interest. So once the server slam went live, I decided to dive in and check it out, and now that I've got a good handful of hours into this, I wanted to share some of my initial impressions and some feedback as well that I have for the game. And normally these videos will be structured with the good section and the bad section / feedback section. However, before we get into that, I think it's important to address the elephant in the room, the thing that comes up probably most commonly when asking people what they think of this game, and that is the art style. In my eyes, this just doesn't fit in the good or bad section because it's just so polarizing. Some people like the art style, in fact, some really love the art style and find it very unique and it really draws them to the game, whereas others hate it so much that they aren't even willing to look past the art style to try to get into the gameplay because the art style just immediately pushes them away. And you know what? That's fine, and I totally understand that. I think it's totally reasonable that if you just absolutely hate how a game looks, despite the fact that you know nothing about the gameplay and haven't given the gameplay a shot, I think it's reasonable enough to just not play that game because it's not for you. And last year, when the alpha for Marathon took place, I was in the same boat. I really didn't like the looks of it, and therefore I didn't even give the alpha a try. I just wasn't interested. However, it has come a long way in the past year. Obviously, it's got the same general art direction, but to me, it looks a lot better. I like the vibes of it a lot more, but I also totally get where the people that hate this art style are coming from. It is very different, but at least it's unique, and it's a very deliberate art style that is cohesive. It works for the game. It's just not going to appeal to everyone. So with that part out of the way, now let's get into more of the specifics. And we're going to start it off with the things I really like about the game. Keeping in mind, of course, this is going to be a much shorter section than the feedback section because it takes time to explain feedback. Whereas for the good stuff, it's generally pretty easy to just list it out. And for me, the biggest thing that stands out that I really like about this game is the gunplay. It feels really good. It's definitely Bungie. You can definitely feel that Bungie DNA there. And that's a good thing. I've been trying to use a decent variety of weapons. Obviously, at this stage, I haven't used every gun in the game, but I've been forcing myself to branch out, pick up new guns whenever I have the opportunity, try things out. And there appears to be a solid amount of variety in the weapons. Each weapons have their own unique character and pros and cons. So much so that if content for Marathon ends up doing well, I may dive into some future content here, breaking down the guns, because that's really what I specialize in. And I think there could be a lot of value there if there's interest. And honestly, just the gunplay alone is such an important element here because out of the available extraction shooters right now, especially in the FPS space, there aren't too many that really excel in the gunplay department, especially for controller. Now, I know I've defaulted to mouse and keyboard for this game. That's for other reasons that we'll talk about in the feedback section or the bad section. But as far as just aiming and shooting goes, it felt quite good on controller with the limited amount of controller time I put in with it. And honestly, I think the gunplay for this game can really be the foundation that lays the groundwork for this game going forward, because it definitely feels like they're leaning into the more competitive PvP-oriented extraction shooter space rather than the hyper-casual, try-to-make-friends sort of extraction space. Another thing I noticed, I have seen some complaints about this, but just sharing my personal experiences, my audio experience has been quite good on this. I've been able to pinpoint footsteps or gunshots in the distance very effectively. I'm hearing lots of sound cues as well. I don't fully understand all of them, and I'm excited to learn more about every sound cue to know what it actually means. But I'm hearing sound cues all the time, and the positioning on that seems very precise based on my experiences so far. I have yet to have an enemy player just sprint up on me without me hearing them first. But obviously, if you're crouch walking, then you're not hearing that, and that's how it should be. So far at least, my experience with the audio has been great. Next up, another thing that I really like, coming from somebody that isn't super into extraction shooters, I'm trying to get into them more because it is shaping up to be the next big wave of gaming and I don't want to miss out on it entirely, so I'm really trying to get into it more. But one thing that's often really discouraging about extraction shooters is the feeling of wasting all of the time you put in when you die. And I fully understand losing all your loot, that's an important element with that. But one thing I'm liking about Marathon at least is you maintain your XP gains throughout a run. So if you do a bunch of things within a run, you get a bunch of kills for instance, and you die before you can exfil, of course the stakes are still quite high because you lose everything you took in with you, all of your loot is gone. But you can at least make some pretty decent XP gains just for the time and effort that you put in. And it makes it feel like I didn't completely waste that last 20 minutes or so, even though it obviously still sucks and you don't want to die and lose all your stuff. And then finally, for this section of the good things, obviously there are other things I like about the game, but I don't want to get too in the weeds and nitpicky with every little thing. But one thing I'm really enjoying is the loadout structure, where you have essentially like perks that attach to your character. They're usually pretty minor, like they're not going to give you a massive competitive advantage overall based on what I've seen so far. Maybe there will be more down the road that are like a higher rarity, but I really like the structure of that. It seems like you can really build your character into certain directions, but of course you're also risking those perks, so when you put them on, you can lose them. And so far, I'm finding the shell or character balance to be quite good and interesting as well. So there's different characters you can choose, and they have different abilities and traits. And I think that just adds a nice layer of depth to the gameplay experience, as long as they can stay on top of keeping them balanced with each other, of course. That is likely to be a challenge, especially with how PvP heavy things are. You want to make sure you don't have a meta character where you just have to use that if you want to hold your head above the water in a PvP environment. But so far, at least, I'm liking the different characters. Now, let's get into the bad/feedback section. It's mainly going to be structured as feedback rather than this just sucks. And it is worth noting, Bungie has already addressed a bunch of the community feedback and mentioned that they are going to be working on various areas. But even if they've already addressed it, I'm going to be sharing that feedback regardless. The first thing I noticed right away is I initially planned on getting this game on PlayStation and playing it with controller, just because I've largely developed a console audience here, and controller is just kind of my default input, even though I have no problem using mouse and keyboard. And the thing I noticed right away that I really didn't like is they use a cursor system for all of the menus with a controller instead of just like using your directional pad and like tabbing through things. You have a cursor and you have to like click on things as if you had a mouse. And that's not a complete deal breaker. However, one thing that's really frustrating in the game's current state, at least, is there doesn't appear to be any method of adjusting that cursor speed. And it's quite slow, so navigating through the menus is very painful on controller in my experience. And that also applies to loot management as well, if you want to go through your backpack and move loot around. So I played the tutorial as well as one match on controller and very quickly decided, nope, we're playing this on PC with a mouse and keyboard instead, and it has been significantly better on mouse and keyboard. So absolute bare minimum for controller players. I'm hoping we see a setting that allows us to adjust our cursor speed if they're going to stick to that cursor system, which at this stage they likely are. Additionally, though, it would be nice to have the ability to use a separate system that's not cursor based. So you could like use the directional pad to navigate through your loot, for instance, and use your tab buttons to tab through everything. I realize it is really tricky to design complex inventory management systems that work well with a controller. So I never really expect it to be on par with mouse and keyboard, but in its current state, I just think it's got a lot of room for improvement on controller. Next up, another thing I've been noticing the more I play is many of the items in the game look literally 100% identical when you look at their icons, and the only way to see what it actually is to hover over it and read its description and its title. This primarily applies to the cores and implants. Those are like your perks that you put on your character. And this just feels very wrong that you can't identify what an object is in your inventory without hovering over it and reading. And to be clear, I'm not talking about the learning curve of just learning what the different icons look like and understanding the loot in that way. I mean, even if you perfectly understood every single bit of loot in the game, you would still have to hover over these to read them to see which one is which, and that shouldn't be the case. Every single unique item in the game should have a unique icon, so at a glance, you have the ability to know exactly what that is and what it's going to do for you. Again, even if you have to like study up to learn all the icons and stuff, that's fine, but they should have different icons, especially in a game like this, which really seems to be pushing a bit more of the faster paced, competitive, like PvP style action. You need to be able to manage your inventory very quickly, and that's a big skill gap that's attached to it, and this is just a very unnecessary roadblock that gets in the way of that. Another thing I was pointing out a lot with my first session that I streamed is the menu UI is just not super intuitive. Now, I'm not going to claim that this is the worst UI I've ever seen in a video game. It's far from it. And over time, I have gotten used to it. I know how to get around and navigate it. But the key here is it just wasn't very intuitive, and a good UI should be super intuitive right from the beginning. It shouldn't take you multiple hours to really get a good feel for just navigating around and doing the basic tasks that you would have to do between each run. So obviously not a deal breaker, just takes a little bit of time to get used to, but still something I wanted to mention as it was a bit of a sticking point initially. Now after that, let's talk about the AI a little bit. And overall, I quite like the general difficulty of the AI, although sometimes I think they can get a little bit too aggressive, and that can be frustrating when you have very little loot, for instance. They can get very aggressive, but I do like the fact that the AI are fairly deadly, especially when you get multiple and they start swarming you. you can easily get overwhelmed and killed by the AI. And while I do like that element of it, something that I'm not a fan of is how tanky some of the AI is. It can really suck having to unload multiple magazines in order to kill some of the heavier, tankier ones, especially in a game where ammo can be quite sparse. Now, obviously, this is something to adapt to. I've been adapting to it, taking a little bit of extra ammo in with me, or just trying to conserve my ammo more and trying not to engage with AI at every opportunity. But I just can't help but feel that there's some room for improvement when it comes to this. I think it would be nice if we had a bit of a higher drop rate of ammo when killing AI. So that could be a method of stocking up on a little bit of ammo, as if you engage in fights with them, you end up coming away with more ammo rather than less ammo, as long as you are going and looting after you take them out. And of course, as long as you're not missing a bunch while engaging with them. Next, let's talk about the maps a little bit. And of course, this is the server slam right now. We only have access to 2 of the maps, and I'm very curious to see more of them for sure. But most of my playtime has been on Perimeter, the first one that you unlock. And one thing I've really been noticing is it doesn't feel like each point of interest is visually unique enough, and they don't really seem to signal what kind of area it is and what kind of loot you should be expecting in that area. Now, I know you can open up the map and you can click on the area and it will tell you a little bit about that area and some of the loot you can expect to see. And also, of course, as you put the time in, you will naturally learn that stuff. You'll start to know where to look for certain things and which area contains which sorts of loot. And that's fine, I am already starting to learn that a little bit. But I think ideally in a game like this, that should be signaled visually a lot more clearly. And it would also make for a little bit more of an interesting map if each point of interest were a little more visually unique than they currently are. And then finally, just a couple little quality of life things I'd like to point out here. The first one relating to the map, as far as I can tell, I haven't been able to find a way to open the map while on the move. So while traveling between points of interest, it would be nice to be able to pop the map open while still moving forward, just to see a little more detail of what's ahead, or perhaps to plan my route a little bit better while staying on the move and not just standing still. That would be nice. I don't think that would be a downside whatsoever to have a map open while moving. And then another minor thing as well that I'd really like to see, even if it's just a setting, I'd really like to see any form of movement break you out of a looting menu. So if you're looting an enemy player or a crate on the map, for instance, as it is right now, if somebody starts shooting at you, panic sets in and you gotta hit the escape button or tab button to get out of there. And I just think it's much more intuitive to just have that tied to movement, or at least provide the option to have that tied to movement. So if you get shot, you just move forward, try to sprint immediately. It will break you out of that menu and you can at least try to fight back. Obviously, that player would still have the jump on you and the advantage, as they should, because they caught you looting. I just think it would be nice to have a bit more of a fighting chance in those scenarios. And there we go. Those are the main bits of feedback I wanted to provide. I'm trying to be conservative with the feedback I'm providing, largely because when it comes to games like this, a lot of the things you see initially as a problem early on in your gameplay time, you start to realize as you put more and more time in that that's actually just a skill issue, or that's something that you sort of develop over time and learn how to work around, and it's an important part of the game. So try not to get too nitpicky with a lot of the individual gameplay elements. And overall, when it comes to my thoughts on Marathon, so far, I'm having a good time with it. Like I said, I'm not a huge extraction guy, but I'm trying to get into them. And this one, at least gameplay-wise, really seems to be more my speed compared to something like Arc Raiders, for instance. Which, by the way, I don't hate Arc Raiders by any means. It just doesn't really hook me, and I generally prefer more like FPS games rather than third-person shooters. And I really think Marathon has the potential to carve out that niche of players that are looking for more of a PvP-oriented extraction shooter. In saying that, I don't think Marathon is going to have the mass appeal that something like Arc Raiders has. I definitely don't see this game overtaking Arc Raiders, not even close, because I feel like the massive amount of highly casual players that play extraction shooters, this is going to be a little too competitive, a little too difficult for them, and they'd rather play something that's a little more laid back and less PvP heavy than this game. And that's also not even mentioning the fact that Arc Raiders just has a far less polarizing art style, and that goes a long way as well. But in saying that, I still think Marathon has potential to carve out that niche, to attract those players that are looking for a more PvP-esque extraction shooter. I think it's got a good foundation and good fundamentals, especially with the gunplay, which is so incredibly important with an FPS game. And while it's unfortunate that the art style is an immediate turnoff for so many people out there, I still think they have that potential to generate an audience and carve out their niche in the extraction space. Now, of course, those are just my thoughts and experiences with Marathon so far, and I'd like to hear what you guys think about this game in those comments down below. Is it a game you see yourself playing going forward? Are you generally enjoying yourself with it? Or maybe not so much? And if not, please let me know why. If you enjoyed this one, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.